Looks like we're live. All right. Well, it's 8:59 a.m. by my computer, but we're going to round it up. So let's call it 9 a.m. on Thursday, October the 8th. I'd like to call this Personnel Committee meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and public have been duly notified in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act to this virtual meeting that we're having due to the COVID-19 pandemic. After calling this meeting to order, I'd like to entertain an approval of the previous meeting's minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Getting through it. Item number 3, citizens' comments. I believe, I think I saw the email, no comments were provided prior to this meeting. And I'll remind our public that if you'd like to make a comment, you can do so using the form on the website, iop.net. Let's move on to old business. We've got 2 items. Item A is an update on the wage and compensation study. So I'll hand it off to the city administrator.
All righty. Good morning, everyone. We have been continuing to do work on the RFP for the wage and compensation study. Like I mentioned last month, our hope and goal is to receive applications by Friday, November 13th, so that we felt like 4 weeks would be appropriate for advertising the RFP and receiving applications, receiving proposals. Oftentimes we receive questions from those interested, so we want to give ourselves some time to answer those questions via an addendum to ensure that they're clear on expectations and clear on what the scope of the work is. So that's our timeline for that. I know that typically we won't be able to make the November meeting date that we typically do, which is the first week of the month. But if it is the will of the committee, maybe we can delay the meeting in November until mid-month, so we can go through and evaluate those proposals and potentially even interview them at that meeting or at a follow-up meeting. That would be ideal. The city will probably have, in the past, we typically have Ways and Means and City Council on the same day due to the Thanksgiving holiday being that last week of the month. I haven't yet talked to the mayor about that, but since he's here listening, he may be agreeable to to doing that as we have done in the past. But it's not required, but it could be done. So we would have time between the 13th and the 24th or the 17th to make a recommendation to council if we feel like we have a good proposal and a good candidate to do this work.
Any comments or questions from?
I'm flexible. Be okay with me to change the date.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And yes, we can be flexible.
So I agree with that. I'm thinking of the logistics. I'm looking at the calendar on my phone. That's why I'm looking down. So the 13th is Friday 13th. The 16th would be Monday, 17th Tuesday, of course, where we would have presumably Ways and Means and City Council, because the next week is Thanksgiving.
That is correct.
So if that is, I do have a little bit of concerns. If the RFPs are due by the 13th, for us to review, and if we needed to ask any questions or we wanted to conduct interviews with the respondents, getting that coordinated prior to the 16th feels a little aggressive. And so that's my only concern, not with the flexibility of this committee, but more so with the actual timing of these events.
I'm sorry. I have switched my dates here. I'm just looking at it. The deadline for proposals is the 6th.
Okay.
That is 4 weeks from this week. So that is why in my head the timeline was working. And then when you mentioned how aggressive it was, it made total sense. So that would give us time to meet on the week of the 9th, have a recommendation for the 17th, hoping that the Ways and Means and Council would happen that same day. I apologize.
No, no,
That is,
no.
that's
Okay.
the timeline.
That feels I feel much better about that.
Sorry for the confusion or the heart attack.
Cool. All right. And I'm sorry, when did you say that went live?
So it's going live today.
Going live today. Okay.
It'll be, yeah, I think the advertisement is going to, in the paper, it's going to run this weekend.
Okay. We've already we've gotten some studies back from other municipalities. Have we reached out to the companies that we've already sent this to them, or we're going to send this to?
Yeah. So once it's posted, we'll go ahead and send a link to the RFP that's going to be posted on the website to these folks, and just, you know, inviting them to apply, to submit proposals, not applying.
Great.
Mr. Chair, question.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor.
Just to make sure, as we compare our salaries and stuff, we are comparing with communities that are very much like ours. I mean, we are a very unique community. We're not like inland South Carolina or the bigger cities. And we're a coastal, tourist-oriented community that has unique challenges. And, you know, I think we're so different from so many other communities. I mean, the only one near us that compares to us a lot would be Folly Beach. And then we just have to go up and down the coast to be comparable.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Any other comments or questions for staff?
Well, do we think that there are agencies out there that would, you know, be, I guess we'd have to wait for the RFPs to come in, but agencies that specialize in sort of coastal communities? Do we have any idea if there's entities that do a lot of work with other coastal municipalities?
I'll take this, Desiree, for just from this was my field, and I worked with these types of agencies. That type of focused niche of we're a company and we only do coastal doesn't exist. What I think we'll see from the RFPs is they'll provide a list of communities they've worked with, and what we'll look for as a committee is they have extensive experience with coastal communities so that they have a lot of different benchmarks. But I think any agency of repute will have a lot of experience in diverse communities, and they'll be able to kind of show us in the RFP, here's why we're qualified to work with Isle of Palms. And it'll cover exactly what Mr. Mayor said in terms of we can find those communities that are comparable. And when not, you know, they're typically going to say they're going to have factors and multipliers that go into this community is based in California, for example, but they're very similar. Obviously, the compensation needs to be adjusted. So we have a way to adjust compensation for California versus South Carolina. Those types of things we would expect to see in the RFP.
Okay, thanks.
No, good questions. All right, I'm gonna move on to item B, unless I see anybody raising their hand. All right. Item B is an update on hiring for the HR payroll officer.
All right, the process is still ongoing. We have interviewed a handful of folks. We are in the process of asking for additional information, particularly about salary requirements from these folks as part of our selection criteria to move forward to the next step in the next phase in the process. We have received a ton of applications through our online portal, so there are still some that we are reviewing as they come. We have, I think I notified you all last time we met a couple of weeks ago that we have removed the deadline for applications and changed that to be open until filled, just because we wanted to give ourselves that flexibility until we felt confident that we really had you know, enough applications to evaluate and give people with, you know, that meet that criteria. It is a little tricky, I will say, because we're looking for somebody that can do payroll and has really strong accounting background that could take on some of the duties that our city treasurer has been performing even before the creation of this position, and also somebody that can handle the human resources hiring, onboarding, and sort of the strategic hiring process for the city. So sometimes we see somebody with a lot of accounting, but not a whole lot of HR type related experience. So we're trying to make sure that even if they don't, do they have the ability to learn that and sort of grow into that position with time. So we're hopeful that we are in the right path and that we have really good people interested, and we'll just continue to move on and move forward to try to add someone to our wonderful team up here.
All right.
So I have.
Councilmember Streetman or Mr. Mayor, any?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. It's been my experience in my past corporate life that a lot of people in the HR departments have both skill sets. They'll start either in the financial side and then move to the HR generalist side, or vice versa. They get a lot of cross training, at least in my experience, has been taking place in a lot of HR departments. So hopefully you'll be able to find someone who's well-rounded and be able to take on both and do it well. I know that's the goal.
Yep.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
out of my area of expertise, my life has been on Isle Palms. My business has been on Isle Palms. So I'm going to leave that to the experts, which is you and Desiree and Rusty and Ron. So thank you all for your backgrounds and your work.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor.
One observation from me that I'm looking to validate, which is, it sounds like we don't have a good, like a solid timeline on expectation here, because that adjustment to open until filled would lead me to believe, in other words, I'm thinking about giving an update to full council, and I won't be saying we expect to have this filled in November, or we expect to have this filled by the end of this month. Neither of those apply.
As of right now, yes, we don't have a concrete timeline on filling this position yet.
Okay. And in terms of the impact to the rest of city staff, because obviously that work is work that cannot go unfilled. So I know that you and I'm assuming Ron and certainly Debbie are all taking on additional responsibilities. So I guess my only comment is, I am a huge subscriber to you don't rush a hire, because especially with the family of employees that we have at Isle Palms, bringing in someone who's not a good fit is not a good thing. So never rush a hire. But at the same time, you have to balance that with having folks who are picking up additional responsibilities. And I guess just maybe if you can give a reaction or comment on, how you feel like the rest of staff is doing, and that everyone is feeling, no one's overly burdened, I guess I just want to make sure that we have that well underway.
Yeah, before the good thing I think for us is that before the creation of this position, some of the duties were being handled by the department heads, such as hiring and the interview process. So they have experience, and they have been used to tackling that, right? And we don't have, there are times when we have some turnover or some hiring vacancies, but we typically don't have that all the time. And we're a small community, we're a small organization. So whenever we have, a couple hires, then, usually the process can be timely, sure, but certainly doable. I'm not going to say that we're not overburdened, because even before this, before these vacancies have occurred, the level and the amount of work that we have been managing for the past year has been overwhelming, and I'll be the first one to say it. So you know, it sort of, it is what it is. You know, we'll do what needs to be done. Certainly, you know, it's very present for me that I don't, you know, I guess selfishly for me and my team, I don't want us to overburden ourselves more than what we have to for a long period of time. But for us, really, our priority is really taking the time to do this thoughtfully and do this very carefully, and hire somebody that's going to be with the city for a long time, and somebody that you know meets our expectations and meets the expectations of the job. So I don't think that this is going to take a long time. Certainly, you know, it's only been a month. And I know that for some that may look like a long time, but in light of everything else has been happening and how we have to prioritize our duties based on the everything else of handling and managing a city, I think that we have sort of met our expectation in terms of timeline for getting and reviewing applications and having some interviews conducted. So it's certainly top of mind, priority, but because I trust that the team that has been taking over and picking up some of these duties are doing it well and are doing it right, I think that gives me some peace of mind to feel comfortable with just having a timeline that really fits for us. I hope that answers.
It does. Thank you. Councilmember Streetman.
Yeah, just a question for you, Desiree. It sounds like, I mean, from your earlier comments, that you already feel good about at least a handful of resumes or applications that you've received. If you started down the road of looking at what salary requirements may be, that sort of thing. So the quality of the ones that you've already sorted through, so to speak, seems to be pretty good, in your opinion?
I would say yes. I do think that there are other applicants that I'm really interested in meeting. You know, I will say that part of the complication is just the amount of meetings that we have been having, not only with council, but, you know, just the day-to-day meetings with managing all these big projects, that, you know, the amount of time that I have available to have interviews, it's also, little. So I'm carving, time around my schedule every single day to try to find 30 minutes to do an initial phone screening or, runs and obviously helping and very much part of the process, as well as Debbie. But it's just that, just the coordination of everything is
right.
Challenging. And we're going to be talking about the fire chief position in a little bit, and that is another top priority. And we do, I will show you all a timeline that we have developed to get a reaction from you all, but that will be something that certainly will take priority as well. And we'll have to happen concurrently as we go through the hiring process for the HR. I don't want to wait until we have an HR to start that process, because that wouldn't be fair to our department. So I think that we put together a timeline that I think might be a little bit too aggressive. I'll see what you will say about it. But I guess the first step is we start talking about developing a strategy for that recruitment process.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if you were intentionally trying to seg, but I think unless Mr. Mayor has any other comments, we can probably move on from old business into this, the new business. We've only got one topic of discussion, which is the hiring process for for a fire chief in preparation for the retirement of our beloved Chief Graham.
I know. Well, Chief Graham has provided her retirement notice. I don't think any of us were surprised. Certainly sad. I did my fair of reminiscing and with Chief Graham. She will always be one of my personal heroes. She is just a phenomenal person, and I think has done such a great job for the community of Olive Palms, and she's really a family to this community. And it'll be very different, certainly without her here. But like she said, I think she's ready for taking a step back and leaving an opportunity for the new generation of firefighters to sort of step in and lead the department for the next phase. So I want to share with you all a timeline, and I'm going to share my screen, and maybe we can go through and get some reaction from all of you. Let me see if I can. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
First draft, very fluid, and you won't hurt my feelings if you if you have some feedback or suggestions or changes. All right, so this is pretty much our typical process for hiring process for any position. I've put in some milestones there, some dates that I think could guide every action. So first, we typically obviously identify the hiring need, which we know is exists due to the chief announcing her retirement effective December 31st of 2020. Her and I have started reviewing the job description and updating it, making sure that it includes all of the certifications and the criteria, skills that are required for this level of this position. And we will have a follow-up meeting tomorrow to finalize that. It won't change dramatically. That position was reviewed back in 2015. So it's just a matter of just housekeeping and updating it slightly. So then what I would like for us to also focus during our conversation this morning is the development of a recruitment plan and a strategy on how this position will be publicized, both internally and externally, developing the criteria for the candidate screening, and particularly what the interview process will look like and who will conduct the interviews. We recently went through the process of hiring for the city administrator and for the chief of police, so we have a model that we can certainly follow. After going through that process, there may be changes to it and improvements to that process, and I'm hoping that we can discuss that as well. We would be working at staff level, developing the hiring brochure, very similar to what we put together and advertised for the 2 other executive level positions that the city hired last year. And our milestone, our goal would be to have that completed and distributed to the committee by next Friday. That would include a description of the community, of the department, of the position, and then instructions for the application for the application process. We would be advertising the position internally and externally, and we would use several mediums for that. Obviously, the city website, job posting websites, social media, local papers, and also fire industry publications that we had identified with the help of the fire chief of just firefighter specific magazines or websites that will help distribute this information to a wide range of folks. That process, we have it lasting 4 weeks, through October 16th through November 16th. If we want to compress this timeline a little bit more, we can, change that to, rather than a full month, we can do it for 3 weeks. That's, just something to consider, that could be, maybe that 4 weeks, we think it's too much and could be shortened. Then we would be obviously reviewing applications as they come in, just making sure, going through resumes and going through to ensure that they meet the minimum criteria. There are, a number of certifications that are required that we want this person to have on hand when, as they apply. So we'll be going through and sorting those applications based on that just minimum criteria and skills and training that we want this person to have. Another thing that we have done in the past, thanks to the chair personnel guidance and advice, is standardized assessment. It helps to have a tool to evaluate these applications through an objective lens. And it just provides another layer of assessment, right? It helps us try to wiggle down to a list of top candidates. So, I would recommend that we do this for this position as we have done for others in the past. And that could also happen concurrently. I don't think that we should send the assessment to everybody who submits an application, but those that do go through the initial screening of, training and certifications that meet those minimum criteria could receive that link and the instructions to complete that assessment. And I think that giving them a week to complete that would be appropriate. As you can see there, according to the timeline, that would happen between November 20th and November 27th, which is right, in the right smack of Thanksgiving, but thinking that people may have time off would have an opportunity to complete the assessment. We will be, I just want to highlight, we will be working through the holiday season just by virtue of when the effective date of Chief Graham is, which is December 31st. But anyway, then we would be doing phone interviews and initial screening, continuing to wiggle it down to some, top candidates. I have here that we would be conducting interviews the week of December 14th and 18th. Again, this is fairly fluid, but that takes us completing interviews before Christmas and the holiday season. Then after the week of Christmas, we would be performing background reference checks, drug tests, and the physical exam. And then a final decision and presentation of offer letter sometime in January. Just because some of these activities will happen in the during the days off and holidays, I didn't put a hard final date on the final decision. But I think if we work, within January, whether the presentation of the offer letter happens early January or mid-January, I think we also need to be aware that if we hire externally, then we would need to give that person some weeks for notifying their current employer or making a move if it's somebody that's out of the state. So just obviously take this with a grain of salt in a way, because it's sort of fluid and we'll have to work around some things, but I felt comfortable with this timeline being doable. And I've shared this with Chief Graham, and she thinks that is definitely achievable. That's all I have. I would like to get responses. I can leave this up if you all want to.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be good.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. I have lots of thoughts, but I better let my fellow committee members chime in first, because I have so many thoughts to share. But I think I saw the mayor's hand go up first.
I'd like to go first, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Sure, that's fine. Go ahead, Councilmember Sherman.
Do we have a succession planning process in place for the city within the departments, Desiree? I mean, a lot of the questions I have around this is that we've got a department there that has over 30 full-time employees and a number of battalion managers, that sort of thing, and I'm assuming that there's been training and certification going on with that group as an ongoing basis, so and being prepared to step up to the next level. And I guess where I'm going with this is my personal hope would be that we'd be able to find the right person internally, but I agree with the process that would go external too, to just kind of look and see what's out there or who's out there that might qualify. And but that's kind of a compound question I'm asking, but I just wonder how we've been doing through the years, and making sure that others that are answering to Chief Graham has had the necessary training and certification as they grow their professional career.
And the answer is yes. There is a chain of command, obviously, within the fire department, and there are battalion chiefs and also the training officer who works very closely with Chief Graham. And the department is very well equipped to transition during this process.
Mm-hmm. And all I have to say, I mean, it's if you've got the right people for the job, for the job internally, I think that always helps from a morale standpoint. If you're able to do that, and it lets people know that, you've got a future here. If you sign on and you work hard and you do the necessary training, certification, that sort of thing, you've got a shot at moving up to the next level. And I don't want to rule out, a better external candidate at some point, but I do think it's important that we, take a look inside as much as we can also. So that's pretty much my thoughts around that. And then I guess the other question I've got is, we're talking about the standard assessment link. Typically, how long does that take a person to do that assessment online?
About an hour or two, right, John?
It depends on the assessment that you intend to use. If it's the Wonderlic assessment that we've used in the past, it's typically 30 to 45 minutes for the whole. It's actually 3 sets of tests, but that's about it. It's a very reasonable ask to give them a week timeline.
Okay, and that's really all I've got right now. There may be another question that comes up during this discussion, but that's it for me at this point. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Rusty hit on a lot of the points I would like to say. The morale amongst our fire department and the local knowledge amongst our fire department, the camaraderie, our public safety personnel, police and fire, when they go to work, they may not be going home. And so each one of these personnel has each other's back. When it comes to the fire department, it's even more so, because not only the police come and they work the shift and go home. Fire department stays overnight. They break bread together, they sleep in the station. We've got 4 battalion chiefs, anywhere from 13 years to 25 years in the Alabama. I think it's critical that we kind of look at the fire department first, see who's interested in that. We've got captains who may be interested. It's like when our city administrator, I knew Desiree was our home run in the very beginning. It was a year of dragging it on when she ended up with a job that I knew she was going to get. I mean, I knew in my mind that she was the perfect fit for Alabama. And I see in our fire department that we have several great potential candidates to fill Chief Graham. She's done an incredible job. The first female on Alabama, the first female chief in South Carolina. Our staff, our personnel know that department. They know what's expected. As I said before, we're talking about, looking at compensation. We are a very unique community. Getting somebody from elsewhere who does not do water rescue, ATV, search and rescue in the beach, it's completely different. We've got 30-some personnel down there who is a brotherhood, a camaraderie that you can't surpass. So I really think we need to look within before we look at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'll give my commentary, and I'll echo one part of what both my fellow committee members have voiced, which is, I believe the ideal, really in almost any hiring, is that you have an internal candidate that is the most qualified person for the job. There's so many reasons that that's beneficial. So I wholeheartedly agree that I am hopeful that we have an internal candidate that we can, very quickly move into this position. Obviously, we don't have to worry about them notifying their employer or moving. And so this timeline would have us with a relatively little transition period with that, So I think that is wholeheartedly ideal. I will say, after the processes that we followed for the administrator and the chief of police, The big difference that I see from this timeline that was pretty integral to that last process was working with an external recruiter. And we had a pretty bad experience, to put it mildly, with that external recruiter. I think because we really utilized probably more services than we should have with them. They kind of gave us it was really a full turnkey solution. And the fact of the matter is, you use a recruiter to get at their network of candidates. That's probably the most valuable thing that a recruiter brings to the table. So number one, I like to say, I appreciate this perspective, and I think it's the right way to go, that there's no need for us to start off with a recruiter. And I would say, if something happens and by January we haven't found a candidate that we think we can hire for some reason, at that point we could say, let's bring in a recruiter to help us. But starting off with just doing this fully internally makes a lot of sense to me, especially given the experience that we had last time. I think the recruiter, if we look at those two experiences, in one case we hired internally, and in one case we found someone externally, and that external hire was amazing. We brought in Chief Cornett, who has just been a phenomenal addition to our community, into our public safety. And the internal hire, having gone through that process, we did a nationwide search, and we interviewed and tested and screened a lot of different candidates with a really diverse set of backgrounds, and Desiree rose to the top. And, having gone through that process as a city, and Desiree as a city administrator can look back and say, this wasn't just a kind of, hey, you're kind of in line for this, let's put you in it. It was this massive search of, you're actually the most qualified person that we've come across. Like, there's no one more qualified than you for this job. And we might have had that assumption going in, but we now can definitively and objectively, using the process that we followed, say, you're the best person for this position. And that's why I like what I see here a lot. I do think it's a little aggressive, but I also think it's achievable. We've kind of tweaked what we do over the last, because we've done this recently. We've had these two hires. So I would say I like this timeline. I wouldn't condense the marketing of the job. I think a month is probably adequate. Not having a recruiter helping us might diminish the quantity of candidates, but I don't think it'll diminish the quality. I think we'll have, I don't know the state of our internal staff in terms of who's interested in this job. I don't have my finger on the pulse. So Desiree, you and Chief Graham have probably had those discussions, and I'm sure that you both know that. But in terms of, I don't know what we have to do from a compliance standpoint in terms of offering jobs externally from a governmental standpoint. I know a lot of companies have that policy. I think it's best practice for us to open this job up, market it, bring in, knowing that, we would, all else being equal, if you had one candidate who was, here and who's external, and another candidate here, same level internally, the internal has the edge, because we would much rather work with somebody who's in our family. But we have to go through that process of opening it externally and going through the motion. And I hate to say going through the motion, but truly, you don't know what's out there and what you're going to find. But I'll say I agree. The morale of this department, and making sure that we are giving them, a absolute shot at this is really, really important. And I'm glad Rusty was asking about succession planning. I mean, I think that's critical to our city, so that when this happens, when we have a retirement, we can make an important hire within 3 months, which is what you have here. I think that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that in our succession planning, we have candidates internally who are ready to take on that job. So I'm not, in terms of what you've got here, I don't have anything to change or recommend. I think it's spot on. And I'll offer up, any help you want from me in terms of reviewing or copywriting, or setting up assessments or whatever. I'm happy to help, outside of the committee. Mr. Mayor, I think I saw your hand go up.
Let Desiree go first, please.
Sure. Go ahead, Mayor.
Okay, just for, again, I do think that inside and outside is a smart thing to do. But I'd also like to throw in one more little curveball is to have a blind survey amongst our fire department, just to get their opinion of whoever in our department applies, a blind survey who our department feels would be their best candidate. And nobody would know who voted. It's just everybody gets one vote on who they feel would be the next successful chief to try to fill Chief Graham's position. A blind survey amongst our fire personnel. Thank you.
Desiree?
Well, I'm, I think that's a very interesting proposition. I guess my only concern, and I'm sure that we can find a way to actively request feedback from the department. I think that'll be very important, just like we did with the police department, make them not only communicate with them as we go through the process and make sure that they're aware of everything, but also give them an opportunity to provide feedback and chime in. My only concern about a survey like that is I would fear that this could turn into somewhat of a popularity contest of, you know, I don't know. I haven't done that before. I'm not sure, John, in Rusty, in your experience in hiring, you know, how that could be done. I just think that we would have to be careful in how those questions are presented, so that it's done in a way that's just done right. I don't want that to again become sort of a popularity survey, and then that, you know, the impact of that in the department, you know, afterwards, and the morale. So again, I don't have any experience. Maybe this is done, and I'm sure that there's a way to do it right. But I guess that's my initial reaction. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll let Councilmember Streetman go in and weigh in, and then I'll chat. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, in regards to the blind survey, I don't know that I would be in favor of that, because I do think you set up an expectation when you do something like that, that it's definitely going to be an internal promotion. And again, the popularity contest that Desiree mentioned is also a big risk as well. I mean, I honestly think that we look at what the qualifications are internally. I totally agree with Chair Moy's comments earlier on everything he said, that we look internally but don't rule out externally. And I agree with the timeline and all of this as well. But I think what we do is we look at the internal qualifications, the ones who express interest in moving up to that level, and hopefully we have some really good people inside that are really eager to move forward and apply for this position. And you know, the blind survey itself, I just I can't get there on that particular comment. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll weigh in pretty consistently. I think Mayor Carroll's what's underlying his recommendation is an incredibly valid point that isn't well represented on this process, which is, I believe, implied, at least it was implied for me, and I'm glad that the mayor brought it up, because it's important that we make some of these things explicit. And what we did with the chief of police is we had really a few different rounds of interviews. We had an interview with personnel committee, we had an interview with the public safety committee, and then we had a meet and greet, which wasn't an official interview, with the rest of staff. And I'm not saying that we have to do that exact same thing, but that's not necessarily represented on here, is how do we engage our existing fire department in the process. And I know that was implicit, and I know there's, Desiree, that was intended by you and the chief. But I would say that would be helpful to add. As it relates to doing a specific survey, the biggest concern I have, in addition to some of the things that you and Rusty brought up, is if you conduct a survey, not only is there an expectation that you're going to be hiring internally, there's also an expectation that you're going to do what the survey says. And if anything that we do that maybe is contradictory to a survey is that in effect, it's a huge hit to morale. So I think it is absolutely vital that we engage the fire department. That the way that they work together is, something I won't. It's not something I've been a part of, but I understand and I can see that it's, they have to have each other's backs, and so their involvement in this hiring process is very important. I totally agree with that, which is at the heart of what the recommendation was. So I would say, maybe if we put a little bit more detail to the interview process, what we intend there, because that is a short, 1 week. If we intend to have the same rounds that we did last time, where we had, and I think we can, because we did it all in one, it was 3 candidates each in a day or whatever. That's what I would maybe make more explicit, is how are we involving the fire department in this whole process and making sure their input is captured.
And I will say that it's I guess my perspective, it was implied in the conduct interview process, thinking about the same way that we did the meet and greet when we hired the chief of police. It'll be tricky, just like it was for the police department, because of the shift. So I have had some discussions with the fire chief about how we do that nowadays in light of COVID. Potentially, whether it's digital, through Zoom, and schedule the time for different shifts. That's certainly been on my mind, and it's been, I've been thoroughly discussing how do we physically engage people in the process. But that would be happening when, as part of the interview process, of assuming that when we will be interviewing the top 4 candidates, that at that point, I think it would be very valuable to bring them in and give them an opportunity to meet them, to ask questions, and, and then be able to provide to us their feedback. So I'll, definitely make it explicit in the conduct interview process, but that is, it would just be consistent to how we did it before. So I guess I want to chime in a little bit more on the strategy, because I've been hearing a lot about internally and then externally. And, do we want to advertise it internally first for a week or 2? Do we want to do it concurrently and then just, first interview internal candidates? I wanted to get your feedback on that, what your expectations and desires would be, and also what the interview process will look like and who will conduct the interviews. Do we want to create a panel of members of both public safety and personnel at the same time? I know we talked about it, last year, about that feeling a little bit too overwhelming when you have so many people interviewing, and maybe we want to follow the same process we did last time, when we had 2 different sets of interviews, and then each group would have a structured interview guide, with questions, and then they would objectively grade their responses, and that we can have something objectively to evaluate after each interview. So do we want to do the same thing, just so that I can, as we continue to refine the timeline, do we schedule different sets of interviews and then a meet and greet, or just try to do it all together when it comes to council interviewing and me interviewing the candidate? Any reactions?
Well, I'll be interested to hear the mayor's perspective, and actually the 3 of us have 3 different perspectives, because Rusty was a citizen, a private citizen, and not a council member at that time. The mayor wasn't on personnel at that time, and I was on personnel, and so I think we'll have three different perspectives. I saw Rusty's finger go up, so I'll let him chime in first. I've got my position.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I was going to defer to both you and the mayor and Desiree in regards to that part of the process, since I wasn't on board on council at that point, and I know that you all probably had things that you thought worked well and things that didn't. So I would just defer to you all to work through that. And I'm okay with whatever's decided. I mean, it seems to me like it would be reasonable to, have kind of a combination of public safety and personnel involved in the selection process, interview process. And in regards to the advertising or posting it to the internal organization a week ahead of it being posted externally, I wouldn't have any opposition to that personally. I think that might be a good gesture, actually. So, but again, I will defer that to whatever you all think. That's it. Thanks.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Number one, all of our fire personnel know what's going on, so it's not like they don't know. Again, I love this timeline. I think we need to get it done and to get it done before the end of the year. I'm all in favor of this timeline. Let's go ahead and do it internally and externally. Let's get the ball rolling. And I agree with the Public Safety Committee and the Personnel Committee conducting the interviews.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To the first question about when we advertise internally, I don't have a super strong opinion. I guess we just want to make sure that everyone knows it's being published both places. I would hate for it to be like, we're going to post this internally and then we post it externally and the reaction is, I guess none of us are qualified because now they're posting it externally. So I think the communication there is pretty important. I don't know what it gets us by doing that though, I guess is my question. Like what's the purpose of opening it up internally if we're still going to open it externally and this timeline isn't really going to change except that they can maybe start their application sooner. They probably, anybody who's interested is already probably getting their materials together and thinking about what they're going to do. So I don't know that it actually gives us anything additional by doing so. So that, I guess that would be my question is it more likely to do damage than actually do help us out in some way?
Yeah.
But I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. As long as the communication is, well executed, which I have no doubt it would be, then I think we're fine. On the interviewing procedures, I could go either way. Here's what I'll say. First of all, look at the outcomes of the last process, and what we had were pretty definitive support for both of the candidates that we recommended out of that process. So that was what was really nice is we went to council having had 6 members of council having been part of interviews, and there was near consensus on both candidates to say this is who we believe like really was the most qualified person for these positions. And it was nice to have that level of support from that quantity of council members going to full council. I know that there were some council members who felt like they should have been a part of the interview process, that maybe all of council should be interviewing for these. I think 9 people is too many people to interview. And I understand there's colleagues on council that would disagree with me that everyone needs to be part of the interview. I think it's too much. And I think that we can, following the process that we do, that is designed to be incredibly objective. And it's really just who's the person at the table who's collecting the information to then present it to others. I think that's fine. So I really like the 2 committees doing the interviews and then the meet and greet. But I would say the alternative, if there was a will or desire, the alternative that I would consider, not recommend, is maybe the chair of personnel and the chair of public safety conduct, one interview together. But I would prefer what we did last time, where we have the personnel committee do a committee interview and the public safety do a committee interview.
Okay. And later this month, we'll have an opportunity to share this with the rest of City Council and get a reaction from them and hopefully solidify the strategy for the recruitment strategy. We'll be well within our timeline to make any changes if they are deemed necessary by the rest of the policy setting body.
Excellent. Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Not having an HR person kind of puts more work on Desiree and Ron, but we've got so many assets at our disposal. The International Association of Fire Chiefs, the Municipal Association of South Carolina. We reach out to them and tell them we have this position available. And I mean, there's instant advertising for us once we put our criteria down.
Absolutely.
I agree.
And Desiree, I know that we plan on advertising this prior to city council meeting. October 16th obviously comes before our next council. And there's no reason not to start advertising a job opening without,
Yes, once the hiring brochure is in draft mode, like I do with everything, I'll send it to you all, give you a day or two to provide feedback and make sure that it conveys the message that the council agrees with. But it's, at the end of the day, it's pretty cut and dry, a description of the community and just the position that's available. So I don't think that we need to spend, and I think that was one of the holdups back in the last time we went through this process. There was some back and forth over the language and over the brochure, when at the end of the day, you're just using that to, make people aware and make people aware of the process and how, if they're interested, what they need to do. So I don't think that we need to spend a whole lot of time, a whole lot of, again, back and forth on it. That would waste, I think that would just
Yes.
delay our timeline.
Great.
Alrighty.
Anything else on the hiring process before we move on to miscellaneous?
None for me, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Great stuff, Desiree. Okay, moving on to miscellaneous business. I do have one item before we talk about our next meeting date that I'm sorry I neglected to put on this agenda. So my apologies to the rest of the committee. But I would like an update from staff on the strategic planning. Just a brief, here's where we are.
Where we are is we will be having the first workshop with the strategic planning team from the Riley Center, October 22nd, if I believe that's correct. Yes, October 22nd, all department heads will be having a socially distanced workshop at the Riley Center. Oh, good Lord. Yeah, the Riley Center offices in downtown Charleston. So we're very excited about that. We'll be going through their initial content analysis and development of priorities and goals that, as part of the schedule that I shared with council earlier last month, or the month before. That's the first step, and then we'll have a workshop with a similar workshop with council. So that's where we are.
Beautiful. So everything on track for the last timeline we got.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
That's all. That's perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
before we create another date, I just want to say thank you to our city staff, because they are so overwhelmed with so much stuff going on right now, so many major projects going on right now. When I go to City Hall, it's like a war room with different charts and different dates and different deadlines they have to meet. And I am just so impressed as how the city is running. I thank y'all. I bow to you.
I agree. Totally agree.
Here, here. That city administrator hiring process worked out pretty well.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor might have known all along, but all right. And any other miscellaneous business?
None for me.
So we have a proposal from city staff to adjust our November date so that we can review the RFPs from the wage and compensation study to the week. I'm going to suggest maybe November the 12th. That would be almost a full week. Thursday the 12th, 9 a.m.
That's perfect for me.
Sounds good to me also.
All right.
And FYI, the 11th is a holiday, so the city is closed on the 11th.
Mhm.
So that's perfect on the 12th.
And-
9
What?
9 a.m.
9 a.m.
All right.
No need for executive session?
Motion to adjourn?
Second,
All in favor? Aye.
aye.
Record at 9:59.
Have a good day.
Just in under a minute.